Welcome to Tommy Solo's Famous Friends. This is where I get to talk with people who I've connected with over the years in the world of arts and entertainment, and this is yet another segment of our Guitar Talk series. And I'm glad to welcome back to the show to talk guitars, Bernie Labarge. Welcome back, Bernie.
Thanks, Tommy. Nice to hear your voice again. Looking forward to this.
Likewise. So, as we were kind of discussing before we hit record here, I realized as I was going through my notes this morning that you started playing guitar at 11 years old, and that was 1964. So I'd have to assume that you were impacted by that hypno beam that was sent out by the Ed Sullivan Show in February 1964, where the Beatles made their first North American appearance. Is that fairly close to the truth?
That is right on the mark. Yes, me and a million other guys, yeah. But, that's what did it to me.
Absolutely. Now,
Mm-hmm.
They weren't playing Fender or Gibson guitars.
No, I didn't even know what kind of guitars they were playing when I was 11. But no, apparently they weren't. No.
No, they were playing Hofner, Gretsch, and Rickenbacker guitars back then. But that brings me to, you started playing at a fairly young age. What was your first guitar?
My very first guitar when I started my lessons was a K acoustic. So it wasn't long after that I always wanted to play electric guitar, of course. That's what every kid wanted to do after they saw George and John and Paul. But so the guitar that kind of came along with the lessons was this K acoustic, which, in hindsight was a pretty neat guitar. So I got a pickup, for it and to stick in the hole. And that was all news to me, too. I didn't know anything. And then I got the symphonic amp from either Eaton's or Sears and plugged my little pickup into that. And I was kind of on my way, other than the fact I didn't know how to play anything.
Well, I'm curious, Bernie, when you say you stuck a pickup in it,
Yeah.
Like, did it actually come with a preamp, or was it just a pickup, period?
It was just a pickup with a wire on it. And, I didn't even know what it was called or anything, right? I just, I'm at 11, and everything was brand new. So I had to, ask my teacher, can I make this louder? Can I put this in an amp? And he said, there's a thing called a pickup. And, it was that basic, so I don't know what make it was. Hard to say, that made no difference to me back then. So I just was happy as heck when I plugged it in. It had a little rotary dial on it. And I pinned it to full volume and I played it through my little 2-watt amp or whatever, and it probably fed back and everything that I wanted it to do. And it was a beautiful thing. So, yeah, I wouldn't have any idea what that pickup was, but
okay.
Probably were only about 2 manufacturers back then, for all I know.
Yeah, no kidding.
Could have been a DeArmond or something that's worth millions. I have no idea.
Yeah. All those lost $1 million guitars and accessories, boy.
Absolutely. I don't own any of them anymore. That's for sure. All the $1 million things are gone, for sure.
I know. If I could just go back and get my 63 SG,
Oh,
right?
Of course. Ooh, yes.
So you went from the K acoustic guitar with some sort of a pickup on it. Now, as you progressed, did you get into a slightly better acoustic guitar, or did you move into playing electric guitar right away?
Well, here was the thing, I always had my eye on electric, but, I'm delivering papers back then. So, of course, I have to lean on my dad at the time, to help me out if I saw something or whatever. And, he wasn't sure. It was just another thing that I was doing, like every kid, you get stuff for Christmas and you swear to God you're going to become a scientist or a professional ping pong player or whatever you asked for that year. And then, it ends up in the closet. So my dad was just considering that this would have been another flash in the pan for me. So I was not really ogling any top end guitars or whatever. So I just had it in the back of, this is vague memories, but to the best of my recollection, I had probably put the seed in my teacher's mind, or Stan Bernard, the guy who owned the Stan Bernard's House of Music in Burlington, where I took my lessons, just that if anything comes in, I'd be interested. So this Kent guitar showed up, and it had 2 pickups on it, and I think it was $40. And so I traded in the K or my dad traded in the K, whatever way you want to put it. And I ended up with this Kent. So I had 2 pickup Kent, which was the same as a silver tone back then, or a bell tone, all that kind of stuff that you would buy through the Sears catalog kind of thing. But it came out to the music shop used. So it's probably, $41 when it was new, for all I know.
Now, was it a hollow body or solid body?
Solid body, 2 pickup with a whammy bar and the 2 toggle switches, and I still have it.
Cool. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I'd be looking that up to see what it was worth. Now, I had my first electric guitar was one of those mail order catalog copies of a Gibson SG.
Wow.
And it had the 2 humbucker pickups on it. They were all made, I think, by the same people, but probably about 10 years after you got your first.
Oh, I was just remembering that you're about 7 years younger than I am. So, because I was just trying to think, I wouldn't have ever even seen an SG when I was 11. But yeah, there you go. Okay.
Yeah, but likewise, solid body. And I had no idea the difference between a solid body and a hollow body guitar until one time later on for me when I was in one of my first gigging bands. I had already acquired my 63 SG, but a friend of mine decided that we should refinish it, which was a mistake. But long story short, while it was being worked on and I had gigs to do, somebody loaned me a Hagstrom Swedish model hollow body guitar for a gig, and that's when I discovered that you had to be really careful with the volume because they fed back like a banshee.
Actually, you won't believe this, but I had, after the Kent, when I knew that, the action wasn't good enough and I was getting better, but it was just getting more difficult to play on the Kent and it wouldn't stay in tune and all that kind of stuff. And long story short, but I ended up with a Hagstrom. You're talking about the Hagstrom Viking. So that's the one that looks like a 335, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I still have that too. That was called the Viking, and that's still one of my favorite necks I ever played in my life. But when I was playing in the band, and back then I guess Jimi Hendrix would have just been coming out then, because I probably got that guitar in 67 or 68. So of course I would have wanted to play all that stuff. So then I found out about the feedback factor and all that stuff too. So I filled the guitar up with toilet paper, and that's how I played it for as long as I had it on stage,
Wow.
And that's what did it for me. But, everything was just, we had no idea. I never asked anybody if I should go with toilet paper. It's just what could I do to make this solid, short of filling it up with concrete or something.
I'm curious, when you say that you filled it with toilet paper, did the drummer in the band have a pillow in his kick drum?
Oh, I wouldn't know. I think we still had the skin head on the kick drum back then. So judging from what we were doing music-wise, I would imagine he would have wanted his kick drum to ring as loud as possible.
No, I was just...
I didn't ever see literally a pillow in a kick drum till I saw Whitey Glenn playing with the Mandela.
Okay. I was just curious if maybe you've been inspired by having a drummer use a pillow. So there was no inspiration from a drummer with a pillow and a kick drum or anything like that when it came to trying to eliminate the feedback from your hollowed body guitar and stuff it with toilet paper to make it into a solid body. That was all your own idea.
Mm-hmm. Well, as far as I know, unless I heard it on the bus or something. I don't know.
Having a random conversation on the subway with somebody who says, I just put toilet paper in my guitar, man, does it ever work?
It's absolutely, or I knew some guy that was in a big band in Burlington, and I went over to his house and asked him what he does. It's hard to say, but I was definitely a sponge and craving for any kind of knowledge I could get at that point. So anyway, I ended up doing that, and it took more toilet paper than I thought it would. It's quite a big cavity in there, but it worked like a charm.
Cool. Now I'm curious. You started playing guitar at 11, and we all know that was 1964, etc. Were there any older kids or people in your neighborhood that inspired you or influenced you as you were coming up?
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. There was a band called the Rising Sons, SONS, and they were older than I was. If I was 11 in 64, they would have been, 17, right? Like, so like men. And they were like a serious band. They had a van with their name on it, and they had like real, like brand new guitars and all sorts of stuff. And their bass player, David Best, he lived just at the corner of the street that I lived on. So I don't know, like I had definitely, knew that they were rock stars, and so they were definitely inspirational to me. There were a lot of really good bands in Burlington, like when I was growing up, that were 4 or 5 years older than I was, and they had like serious gear and the truck and a roadie and like all these things that I thought, wow, this is really motivational, because, and then I ended up in a band like that. So it was just as neat as I had imagined it to be. So that's what kept me going.
Cool. Now, do you remember what the older guys were playing for guitars back then? Were they getting into Fender or Gibson or anything like that at that stage?
Well, when I wouldn't have known back then, but I would have started taking notice though, because like if the guy had a Gretsch, like George's, because that was burned into my psyche, just like John's guitar and Paul's guitar when we saw them on Ed Sullivan. So there was a guy named John Sharp, and he played guitar for a band called, I believe it was the Ragged Edges, and he was fantastic. And he had a Gretsch Tennessean or whatever at that point, and so he ended up. I picked his brain. Like he would show up at the one music store in Burlington, like which is where I took my lessons, and I was never shy about going up and trying to pick older guys' brains and stuff. So John was sitting there playing his guitar one time, and he showed me a couple of things, that were up the neck, like I was still, like, if I made it to the 5th fret, I was in heaven, but this guy was playing stuff like 10th fret, octaves and stuff, right? So he showed me some stuff. So that was John, but back to as far as like real gear, when I look at old pictures of the Rising Suns and stuff, the guitar player was playing a Les Paul, like the flat Les Paul, like the TV model, like not the arch top one, like the double cutaway TV model.
Right, the one that looks like an SG.
Looks more like a Melody Maker.
Oh, okay,
actually.
all
It's
right.
got the round bum on it. Yeah,
Okay.
the round hip. So,
Quick editor's note here. The non-arch top Les Paul model that Bernie was referring to as a TV model, and I was not able to remember the description of at the moment, would have been Les Paul Jr. models, and there were a few variations on the theme. Quick Google search and you'll see what I mean. But we were talking about Les Paul Jr. guitars. Now, back to the show.
it looked like that. And then, like, the bass player was playing precision bass, and who else would have been there? Guitar player. So there would have been 2 guitar players. So we had the Les Paul, and I don't know what the rhythm player would have been playing at that point. But yeah, so anyway, I did definitely notice that. And then when I was delivering papers on the street around the corner from me, there was a guy, I'm still friends with him. His name is Graham Bristol, and he played drums. And he was like, he's probably 8 or 9 years older than me. So like, he was like this guy to play drums, and I couldn't believe it, right? I'd hang around his house and hear him playing in the basement and stuff. So I weaseled my way into if I could come and watch them practice one time, because he had a little band that showed up. I heard them down the basement one time, and it blew me away. So anyway, I talked myself into it, and he was nice enough to say, well, why don't you bring your stuff with you? So I had my tent at the time and my little symphonic amp, and I packed them both up and got all dressed up and walked around the corner to where his house was, went downstairs in his place. And there's these men, and they were from Toronto, believe it or not. So these guys had probably Kellys and stuff, right? And I had my little tent and whatever, and I plugged in, and they were playing probably Fender amps. Like, they were like a real band. And so I remember they let me play along with them, and they played Wipeout, and I got to play rhythm guitar for them, and I'll never leave me that memory. That was my first, exposure to real gear. So that was neat. And then when I joined the Royal Bank, which was a really good band out of Burlington, I was asked to join that band, and they had backline, believe it or not. Like, they had Trainer amps. Like, I got to play through a Trainer signature amp because I still had my symphonic, and that certainly was going to cut it with a band. So I got to play through a signature amp, which I think was twin 12s, maybe a 50-watt head or something. So then I became a bit of not a hot shot, but I was kind of okay for my age, so the manager liked my playing, so they ended up buying me a custom special amp, like the one that the Mandela played with 412s, and it had two horns at that point too. So I just got rid of that head about a year ago. But anyway, so I one of the first custom specials in Ontario.
This is the custom with a K, custom amps?
No, a Trainer, custom
Trainer,
special.
okay, all right, because those things were
Yeah.
indestructible. A friend of mine, John
Yeah.
McGale, who was known for his tenure with the Montreal band Offenbach.
Great band, wow.
Yeah, he was walking down Yonge Street at one point in time way back when, and he said he saw the craziest thing, that somebody was throwing an amp head off the roof. And that's how they were testing the Trainer amps for their durability, throwing them off the roof
Exactly.
at the store.
That is a true story. Yes, it is.
Yeah, that's just crazy how tough they were.
Oh, yes. Mine fell out of the truck a few times and all that stuff, and they were indestructible. And, one time, if we're going to, do you mind talking about amps for a second?
Oh, that's
we're going to
fine.
go back and forth.
Yeah.
I guess you're okay? Okay.
Yeah.
So like years go by, and I used that Trainer Custom Special from 67 through 77, 78. And back maybe in 72 or something, I was playing at the Nickelodeon in Toronto, and I blew a fuse in that amp, and we were playing 6 nights a week. There was no time to take anything in to get fixed or whatever, and I kept blowing fuses on this thing. So I wrapped a little screwdriver in aluminum foil and shoved it in the fuse socket, and I played it like that for like a year, right? And it never blew up on me. And then I finally had a chance to take it in to get fixed, and they took it apart and whatever, and there was this great big like black flame mark on the inside of the circuit board and everything like that from when I would have been shorting out all this time, but it never blew up. It still worked, so that's a testament to Trainer amps for you. They're great.
Kidding.
They were like Marshalls, but way stronger.
Yeah, well,
as far as brutal.
Just reminded me, the last big show that I played was Rockin' for Kids 2020 at the London Music Hall, and I had David Henman as a guest on stage because he actually recorded some tracks with me on my cover of his song Drop Your Guns. And
Fantastic.
And we both showed up with these little Trainer parlor amps. I can't remember it was supplied backline for me from Long and McQuaid's, and then he shows up with the same amp.
No way.
He says, "Where'd you get that?" I said, "Well, it was part of the backline, so where'd you get yours?" But they're still really, making some really awesome gear. Editor's note. So I called my friend David Henman because I was bothered by the fact that I couldn't remember the model number of these twin amps that both he and I showed up with at the same show. In fact, they were Trainer YCV series amps. We couldn't remember whether they were the YCV 20 or YCV 40 series because David has both. Either way, brilliant amplifiers. And thank you, David Henman, for the clarification. Now, back to the show.
They finally got some sort of credibility after years and years and years of people going, "Oh my God, you play Trainer?" Like it was a real kick in the teeth to be playing Trainer for years and years because people were going, "Oh, you got to get a Marshall, you got to get a Fender." Like that was basically the two names in town, Fender and Marshall. And Trainer took years and years to get any kind of credibility. And then there's a story, a buddy of mine was doing security at Maple Leaf Gardens in the 70s, and the Steve Miller Band was headlining this concert there, and he was behind the stage, and Steve Miller had a Marshall stack, or a couple of them, but if you went behind the stage, the Marshall head wasn't even plugged in, and there was an empty 412 cabinet that had like 3 Trainer amps in it, and he was playing through the Trainers, right? But it was just like, Steve Miller's playing through Trainer, like it was just not a cool name for a long time. It was all about
image. Well, the Trainer amps were never supposed to be really pretty or high fashion. They were always designed with rugged durability and quality sound in mind. And yeah, the Fender and Marshall amps certainly did look really cool, and they were highly popular. And I think Like a lot of other Canadian products, Trainer suffered from what I consider Canuck syndrome in the eyes of the buyer. Because, Trainer amps were always known to be indestructible, and as far as I know, they're still really well built. And having played
Mm-hmm.
through one fairly recently, I attest to the fact that they stand up alongside anything else. But it was the cool factor. Marshall was cool and Fender was cool. And even though Trainer amps were amazing quality built, awesome sounding amps, they just didn't have that cool factor. And Bill Durst.
And Vox, of course.
Yeah, Vox. I've got an AC-15 right here in my office.
Ooh, that's fantastic. But like they were unattainable back then. Like just the English fans had them, right? So, but yeah, same thing. But if the Beatles had played Trainer amps, it would have been a different story, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to Marshall and Fender for a minute, years ago, my friend Bill Durst, who was the original lead guitar player,
my God,
original lead guitar player from
Thundermug.
Yeah, Bill Durst from Thundermug, in Africa, was touring with a band in support of his album called Billy, and it's about the most commercial sounding record that he's ever done. It's really pop, but with Bill on guitar, it's never going to be Flock of Seagulls pop. But
that's for sure.
He had this big backdrop behind him that was basically a dozen Marshall amps painted, and so it looked like he was playing through all these Marshall stacks. But in fact, what it was is that Billy was just plugged into a Fender Twin, hidden behind that backdrop with the painted Marshall's amps on it, and put through the front of the house PA.
Oh, yeah, it's all about the look. No doubt about that, for sure.
Yeah, and when I was a kid, like 18, 19, we would go out to a bar and scout the band before going to see them. We'd show up on Monday afternoon, play some pool, and see what they had on stage.
Yes.
And if they had the big Martin butterfly bins and all that, and the Marshall stacks on stage, we'd go, oh, they must be good. Let's come and see them.
They must be good, or they're really super, really rich, right? Oh yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So back to guitars for a minute.
Yes, sir.
I know you have quite a collection, and the videos I've seen of you are pretty much you playing a Fender guitar. So what was your first Fender?
My first Fender was my 69 Stratocaster, the first one I owned. Like I went for a couple of years, like when I had my Hagstrom and then I filled it up with toilet paper and all that kind of stuff. And then I just gave the guitar to Johnny Johnson, our rhythm guitar player, and he played rhythm. And I just decided I wanted to borrow guitars. I wanted to see what kind of guitar I liked. So maybe Hendrix was out, and if he was, then of course I wanted a Stratocaster. Because I never wanted to get a Gretsch or a Rickenbacker, like I never did. So it must have been Jimmy that I was after. But I didn't know anybody with a Strat. And I'd actually borrowed that Les Paul from the guy from the Rising Suns, the TV model. And the unbelievably embarrassing and mortifying thing that happened to me with that was this guy, Ron Canning, rock star, extraordinaire to me back then, and he had this Les Paul. I didn't have a guitar, and I had the balls to come and ask him if he'd lend me his guitar. Like he didn't even know me, and I talked him into it, and he lent me his guitar. We were playing in either Brockville or Kingston in the band, and we had the U-Haul trailer behind the car and everything. It was the midst of winter and whatever. So anyway, I got the guitar out of the case when I got to Brockville, and the head had broken on the Les Paul, as Gibsons were famous for doing back then, right? So I didn't know anything about it, but there I was. I had borrowed this guitar. For all I knew, it was worth $1 million. I had no idea, right? So I had to get the guitar fixed, and we're still friends after that. But boy, oh boy, did I have my tail between my legs. So I had to borrow a guitar from some kid in the audience that night to play. But anyway, I went for a couple of years going around town and bumming guitars, like from people that from school, or like a guy that I knew that would have a Telecaster, and I'd go and knock on his door, and like I was in the Royal Bank, so I had a bit of pull.
Quick editor's note, just to point out that the Royal Bank that Bernie refers to here was the name of a band that he was in from Burlington, not the banking financial institution. Now back to the show.
Anyway, yeah, so I got to play at Telly, and I got to play, what else would I have gotten to play? Well, I got to play that Les Paul for about 2 seconds before the head fell off, and then I got to play probably no Strats, but maybe an FG or maybe like some other crappy kind of guitar, like a Beltone or a Winston or something like that. But I did, maybe a Mustang or something. So it was interspersed between good and bad, right? So, but anyway, I ended up, when I put my band Stem together in 1970, and we were a trio, power trio, but I still didn't really have a guitar. And our bass player, Gary Brown, worked for a music store called Meredith Music in Oakville. And so he would get me guitars off the shelf at Meredith, and I'd be able to use them at gigs. So I got to play like Firebirds and things like that, right? But there was a Stratocaster that I was just salivating over in the store. And so anyway, went on and on and on. And one night, Derek Meredith, Sr., the owner of the store in Oakville, who I'd never met, Gary asked him to come down and watch the band. And we played a set, and you're not going to believe this story, but it's true. And so Derek calls me over to his table after our set and introduces himself and everything. And he says, Gary tells me that you don't have a guitar. And I said, that's true. And he says, well, I'll tell you what, if you can tell people that you shop at my store and stuff like that, you can have any guitar in my store that you want. And I went, what? So I'm maybe 17. And so I said, well, I know exactly which one I want. It's that Stratocaster in your store. And he went, okay. So I went down and freaked out. So I got a brand new 1969 Stratocaster given to me by Derek Meredith. And it took me, like he says, you got to buy the case for it. The case was like $70. That took me like a year and a half to pay for it. So like, there's no way I would have been able to buy a Strat then. It was out of the question. So that's how I ended up with my Strat. And I still have that too. I played that Strat until 1980, like as my main guitar.
That's incredible, and
isn't that a great story?
Yeah, it is. And, similar past, because I never had a great electric guitar for a long time myself.
Uh-huh.
When I first started gigging, I had a couple of older friends who would insist, take my Strat to the gig.
Oh, you got to love that. Okay.
One of those early 70s with the big headstock on it, the Sunburst.
Yeah.
And take my guitar. You don't want to take that imitation SG with you to the gig.
Well, that's nice friends. Don't do that, nice friends. That's awesome.
And then finally, I had an uncle who said, I know you like to play Stratocaster. I'm not really that much into this guitar is more. So my uncle gave me a Sunburst Stratocaster, which was crazy.
It's the same story. It's
crazy.
Unbelievable.
Well,
then you know the feeling. Man.
Difference was I couldn't give my uncle any sort of endorsements.
Oh, shoot. Well,
this came from my uncle.
Well, you know what? Nobody.
This came from my Uncle Simon, and he delivers bread on the bread truck. So, make sure you get Aunt May's bread.
Well, whatever. Listen, if this guy had been a Roto-Rooter guy, I would have had that sign on the back of my guitar. Yeah, I wouldn't have cared, but it was... Anyway, I don't remember anybody ever asked me what kind of strings I played, but I remember being on the microphone, and I'd go, by the way, everybody...
Oh, really?
If you're ever looking for a guitar, go to Meredith Music. I didn't even know what I was doing, but I was shilling for this guy, and it was definitely worth it. And I still can't believe it every time I look at my old baby. I cut my teeth on that guitar. I played my first 10,000 hours on that thing.
That's incredible, and I know that you've got a lot more interesting things to say about guitars and guitar talk in general, and I want to keep going, but let's do that in part 2.
Okay.
So until next time, until part 2, cheers. Well, that was part 1 of Bernie Labarge Guitar Talk, and we have a lot more to talk about next episode. Meanwhile, here is a 1985 single that Bernie Labarge not only played all the guitars on, but sang all the vocals and played all the instruments on. This is Listen to a Boy in Love. From 1985, Bernie Labarge. Enjoy.
I've been
Tommy Solo's Famous Friends is a one-man production, meaning that I've done all the work, including guest acquisition, recording, editing, and so on. And hey, if you like the show, why not subscribe and help support us through Patreon at patreon.com/TommySolo. The theme song for Tommy Solo's Famous Friends is a clip from my original composition, The Burn. All rights reserved. And you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks for listening, and until next time, cheers.